Good evening and welcome to Hybrid by Nature, Human-Machine Interaction. I'm Almuth Meyer-Zollitsch, Director of the Goethe-Institut Hong Kong, and I'm pleased to welcome you to day 3 of this exciting project. Hybrid by Nature, Human-Machine Interaction is a virtual art exhibition and a conference jointly organized by Goethe-Institut Hong Kong and Seoul on behalf of the network of the Goethe-Institut in East Asia. We want to look into a transformative development that is going to change fundamentally all aspects of our lives and society. The increasingly blurred boundaries between real and virtual spaces, our interaction with algorithms and the impact of artificial intelligence on our daily lives, and eventually the infinite collective virtual space, the new metaverse. We have invited 13 artists from Asia and from Europe to create works revolving around the new convergence between human and machines. Please take your time to explore the exhibition and the sophisticated virtual space that Korean artist Ye Bang-song has created for these works. The curatorial concept for this art project and the program for this conference have been developed by Sabine Himmelsbach, Director of the House of Electronic Arts in Basel, Switzerland, in collaboration with Doon Choi, Curator in Arts and Technology based in Seoul. Today is day 3, and we will talk about artificial intelligence in terms of societal challenges, but also in terms of new chances and artistic potential. We have a brilliant panel moderated by curator and researcher Iris Long. Sabine and Doon will walk us through the evening. Before I leave the floor to Sabine to introduce the topic more in depth, allow me a bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and will later be uploaded on YouTube. We will put the links on our website, goethe.de hybrid. All microphones of the participants are muted. Please feel free to tap your questions and remarks into the chat. We will keep an eye on that and bring them into the discussion. The language tonight is English, but we are providing simultaneous translation for Chinese. Please click the button Translation at the bottom of your screen on the right side and choose your language. Now, without further ado, I hand over the microphone to Sabine. Please, Sabine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Almuth. I would also like to invite Doon Choi to show her video feed as well, because we have both been invited and co-curated the online exhibition that Almuth mentioned, and also were co-conceiving the accompanying conference. For us, it's been a real honor to be part of that project, and it was also a very interesting experience because it was a collaborative process with a lot of nominators from regions of Southeast Asia who have inspired us and nominated artists to become part of this exhibition. In today's panel, we would take a closer look on artificial intelligence, or better, machine learning, that seems omnipresent today and is also addressed in many works in the online exhibition. Neural networks and machine learning deliver spectacular breakthroughs in facial recognition, natural language translation, medical diagnosis, and even the recognition of our emotional states, the result of enhanced computational power and the availability of big data. Highly effective algorithms are now increasingly being used in commercial transactions, and our daily interactions are shaped by the so-called Internet of Things, a growing network of interconnected devices embedded in everyday objects and enabling them to indirectly communicate. What role will we play in shaping these interconnected realities? And who will have command over the infrastructure of planetary computer-based networks? Even the field of creativity, which has been previously attributed to humans, is now imitated by machines that create music or art. What is the creative potential of AI? How is it used as a tool by artists? We are very happy that we have such a distinguished panel today to discuss these questions. With the artist Vvzela Kook, who is also showing a new work in the online exhibition. We are joined by Korean artist Shinseungback Kimyonghun, who built a whole body of work using AI, and renowned curator Irini Papadimitriou and researcher Clemens Apprich. We are also very thankful that Iris Long has accepted to moderate today's panel. Before Iris introduces the panelists, let me also briefly introduce her. And I just want to say tomorrow we are discussing the topic of metaverse, and Dun Joy will introduce tomorrow's topic. So Iris Long is a writer and independent curator who currently works as a researcher on art, science, and technology at Central Academy of Fine Arts in Beijing. In her research, she focuses on how art responds to the current global reality of ubiquitous computing and big data. Long has a master's degree in critical writing in art and design from the Royal College of Art in London and a bachelor degree of journalism and communication from Tsinghua University in China. She lectures on data art and artificial intelligence at CAFA in Beijing. At CAFA, she also co-organizes EAST, the International Conference on Education, Art, Science, and Technology. She was shortlisted for the first International Award for Art Criticism in 2014, and her translation work on the seminal and very influential book, Rethinking Curating Art After New Media, received a nomination from AAC Art China Award in 2016. In 2018, she was the recipient of Hyundai Blue Prize, a curatorial award to support emerging curators. In 2019, she curated Lying Sophia and Mocking Alexa at Hyundai Motor Studios in Beijing, and she's the curator of the third session of Future of Today, Déjà Vu at Today Art Museum in Beijing. We have met in 2021 when she was doing her project Blue Cables in Venetian Watercourse that was winning the Emerging Curators Project 2020 online, initiated by the Power Station of Art in Shanghai as a response to the special COVID-19 situation to bring projects online. I'm really looking forward to today's panelists and the discussion, and Iris, I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. My name is Iris Long, and I will be moderating today's panel discussion. So today's topic is about AI and human-machine interactions, and we have invited 4 guest speakers to join the panel, who are Irini Papadimitriou, Shinseungback Kimyonghun, Vvzela Kook, and Clemens Apprich. So yeah, so artificial intelligence based on machine learning has been going through kind of the various stages of experimenting its potential in different realms. And however, it's also true that artificial intelligence still requires, at least nowadays, like human assistance in terms of input, categorization, management, and also assessment. And more importantly, I think the human-machine dynamics, which was also briefly touched upon in yesterday's panel. So I think this kind of human-machine dynamics is also taken into consideration by AI specialists and also cultural practitioners. And it is also pretty clear that in the age of AI, we think that the creativity of artists is simultaneously being challenged, and also in the same time, more attention has been given to the needs of the times, which I guess will also be further explored in our panel today. So just to briefly going through the schedule. So each guest speaker will have 15 minutes to do the presentation, and we will have a panel discussion afterwards for the overall Q&A session. So before we begin, just allow me to again encourage you to the audience to leave your questions or remarks in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will discuss the question later on in the Q&A session. So please allow me to introduce our first panel speaker, Irini Papadimitriou. So Irini is a curator whose practice draws on interdisciplinary and critical discourses to explore the impact of technology in society and culture and the role of art in helping us to engage with contemporary issues. So she's currently the creative director at the FutureEverything, and she was also previously the digital programs manager at the Vienna and head of new media arts development at Watermans. Her display, Artificially Intelligent, was showcased at the Vienna in 2018, and her most recent exhibition, You and AI, Through the Algorithmic Lens, was commissioned by the Onassis Foundation and was presented in Athens in summer 2021. And Irini is a co-founder of Maker Assembly, and which is a critical gathering about maker culture, and industry advisory group member of SODA, School of Digital Arts at Manchester Metropolitan University. And she's also the advisory board member of ONX Studio, a new major collaboration between the Onassis Foundation and also New Museums Culture Incubator New Inc. Irini has been a co-curator for the Arts and Culture Experience at Mozilla Festival, and she's also a recipient of the curatorial research programs, including Mobius, Art Fund, Mondrian Funds, and British Council. She has served as a jury member of the Prix Ars Electronica, D&AD Awards, Lumen Prize, EU Stars, and ACM SIGGRAPH. So Irini, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Iris, for the kind introduction, and also a big thank you to Sabine and Dune and the Goethe-Institut for the kind invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here today. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly so I can start my presentation, and hopefully you can all see that. So, as Iris mentioned, I've been working as a curator, mainly exploring artificial intelligence in the past few years, but also algorithmic perceptions, or like algorithmic lens. And what I wanted to look at today and focus on in the context of this discussion is exploring how artists usually respond to challenges around algorithmic processes and artificial intelligence and machine learning that have been taking over society and applications in everyday life. So I just wanted to start with a quote by Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, which you might have heard earlier in the year, introducing the planetary computer. And he was talking about how easy it will be through the planetary computer app that they created at Microsoft to anyone to browse and explore the state of the planet in as easy as looking for driving directions or like dining options or any other kind of information online. And I think this is quite, that is quite a striking comment, but it's also something that we've been seeing like happening quite often in the past few years in terms of mainly how the big companies respond to, or how they aim to use and how they deal with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and also the IoT and internet worlds as well, and networks. And something that I've been interested in is these kind of two elements that are quite that are coming up here, which is about the idea of managing everything, managing the planet, managing the world, managing bodies, which I'm going to get to touch into a bit later, but also thinking about disconnection in terms of like this remoteness and like the machine that comes in between, like how we manage and how we connect with these things, especially in the Western world. I just wanted to bring in an example, an artistic example here, a work, an installation that was developed by artists and activists and critical engineers, Tiga Brain, Julian Oliver, and Peng Solen, which I had the pleasure to present also in Athens at the exhibition that Iris mentioned, You and AI Through the Algorithmic Lens. So the installation is called Asunder, which some people might already know in the audience. And it's basically, it's an environmental manager. It's an artificial intelligence that is scanning part of the world and is trying to respond to environmental crisis and environmental challenges with solutions like artificial intelligence kind of generated solutions, but with solutions can be quite absurd or like nonsense most of the time. And theirs is a comment that goes back to a little bit to that planetary kind of manager system and comment, which quite interestingly was Asander actually was developed just before the planetary machine came up. So that kind of takes me, and it's something that I've been using quite a lot the past few years, to writing a brief book, actually, passage by Borges, which was written in 1946, and actually it is supposed to be by this fictional writer called Suarez Miranda, and it's a travel diary. And I'm sure most people have come across that writing, which is a paragraph long, and where Borges is kind of through the persona of Suarez Miranda is describing this empire and that has been cartographed and mapped in a way that is so obsessive that this map becomes in the end as big as the empire itself. And it actually ends up like everybody ends up understanding how useless is this map in the end. So it gets up being in ruins and left to kind of to disappear. And this is something that kind of very much goes back to that first quote in terms of like the map and not being the territory, say as well, in terms of like our obsession with mapping everything, with managing everything, the world. And I'm not talking only about topography here or geography or the planet, but also in terms of like bodies and society at large. And it's something that I've been kind of exploring recently in my curatorial work as well, and also in exploring how artists respond to this idea of how we've been using emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, but also machine learning, neural networks, and so on, to recreate and recompose what we have surrounding us, but through different standards, through different taxonomies. And something that I've been kind of looking at is these kind of monocultural aspects and views of the world and homogeneity that is coming out of the other side from that. And a recent publication, actually, it was just before the pandemic that came out, called Surrogate Humanity, Race, Robots and the Politics of Technological Futures by Neda Atanasovsky and Kalin Dvora, which I highly recommend. In one of the chapters, they talk about the enchanted technologies, which is something that many artists have been responding to lately as well. And it's another kind of aspect, just slightly moving forward from the idea of managing managing the world and managing humans and managing non-human entities, like through technologies, is something that we have seen also quite recently as well through the pandemic, is the erasure of the human from the machine as well. And this is what they are talking about in this kind of chapter about enchanting technologies, the idea of obfuscating intentionally the human labor, the human element from the machine, in terms of kind of highlighting the fantasy of the machine autonomy, but also hiding the work behind. And it's something that we have seen, especially when it comes to kind of race and gendered kind of ideas as well. And I'm not sure if you have come across like food delivery bots, but it's something that has become quite usual the past few years. And this is, I picked up this one, the Kiwi bot, because it's a machine that kind of very much highlights this issues. It was created by a Colombian company, quite interestingly, but also, so it's these machines that go around like to deliver food in Silicon Valley, but also in California. Yeah, in California. But what is less evident is the student cheap labor that is involved behind these bots, which basically means that humans that from the Great South, being paid quite cheaply, they have to manage and monitor what happens with these bots. And another artist that I wanted to break up and whose work has been quite influential for my research as well and practice as a curator is Hiba Ali, who has been doing extensive research and writings, and their work reflects very much the conditions in terms of, in this case, Amazon, but also is talking about not just the hidden labor, but also the race and gendered issues and people who are usually affected by these conditions. So in their work, Abra, which was again shown at the UNTAI exhibition, Hiba Ali has created this conversation with Peki, who is the mascot of Amazon, about customer satisfaction. And what they are talking about is it's actually a fantastic conversation about the conditions working at labor, but from the perspective of like a laborer, a worker who is not privileged. And what happens is that as the work develops and the conversation between the two develops, is that you see as a spectator the bubbles that refer to the economy, but also to the machine, as in kind of the bubbles that we build around surrounding like these technologies and their autonomy and kind of intelligence as well, but also bubbles in terms of like the human condition. And it's something that I've been kind of documenting quite a lot recently and it's something that happened at least in the UK and since the pandemic started, this kind of like obfuscation or disappearance of people from like stations where you order food, where you buy products, where you buy services, and the replacement with these automatic machines, which again like hide the fact that there are people behind, there are real people behind that. And it kind of, again, it's something that reminds me Astra Taylor's Foxton Mason comments and extensive writings in the subject. And going back to this idea of management and especially how worlds of surveillance technologies, but also extensive monitoring and quantification take place and happen, especially as we are still navigating like a world which kind of creates more binaries between who is healthy and what is a healthy body, what is a healthy society, and what is a diseased or unhealthy society. This is Technologies of Hope and Fear, a project that was recently developed by Stephanie Hanke and Marek Tuzinski, who are both part of the Tactical Tech Collective based in Berlin. And what Stephanie and Marek did was they created an archive, an online archive of 100 companies that since the pandemic started are taking a very like techno-solutionist approach in terms of giving us ways to erase the pandemic, but also protect the world from any other similar kind of viruses coming in the future, but also monitoring bodies, monitoring health and monitoring disease as well, and creating this kind of environment where everything is kind of clean and and totally kind of perfectly healthy. So as you could see here, this is what is a preview from one of these companies that they created in their archive, which is extremely interesting in terms of like the approach that we have in terms of like two separate worlds in terms of how artists respond and to these challenges, and how the majority of companies that we are, or products that we are presented with. And then going slowly to like going back to this idea of management into the human element as well, but also the idea of quantification. This is another example by Bill Balaskas and Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, which is basically a large mural presented in the style of the Black History like month, like protests as well, and also talking about the Black bodies and how they are kind of left behind, but also how they are extremely monitored and surveilled by these technologies. And what you see here is the algorithm that was used by the Los Angeles Police Department to identify, but also to monitor people and the crime in the areas of Los Angeles, where historically there were high crime rate areas. But also what happened is that this algorithm, of course, as it proved, was wrongly kind of profiling people, because it was collecting historical data that was no longer, of course, valid as well. So Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, which is a community-based collective by artists from different backgrounds and communities, they worked with the local communities that were affected in Los Angeles to try to dismantle this, the use of this algorithm. So what we created in Athens was basically a large mural to remind us of the presence of facial recognition, which, going back to a little bit to history and the past, it kind of reminds us like how we use these technologies today to reproduce mistakes from the past. And one thing that, of course, is very much present in terms of the facial recognition technologies and profiling is the use of physiognomy, which is basically characterizing people based on their facial facial characteristics, and trying to create like a profile about themselves as humans, which of course we know it was a technique that was used by criminologists in the early 1900s, and of course also by eugenics and Nazis, and of course has been totally dismantled after that. But of course it's making a return today with facial recognition technologies. So one thing, and maybe one provocation that I wanted to bring in terms of like our discussion later, is that if we can even talk about ethics, which is something that we can see being discussed very much lately, especially not just by in cultural context, but also in terms of technological context as well. And does it make sense to talk about ethical applications of technology if we are talking about facial recognition, or if we are talking about profiling and surveillance technologies, and if these are going to replicate forever inequalities and injustice? And this is something that Paolo Tirio created recently in response to these challenges, and he tried to reverse this process by categorizing, by using public images of policemen in France during the protests last year, and inviting people to identify the policemen, which of course was met with a lot of criticism. But actually he's reversing, he's using what has been usually used by the power-empowered institutions towards citizens, the other way around. And this word is called capture. So it's really interesting to see how artists respond to technologies that are very much about ideas of power and powerlessness as well. And just wanted to close, because I'm pretty sure that I've used all my time, that in terms of just going back to the art role today, and just reflecting to my work as well as a curator, and I've been thinking of like art's role in terms of enabling us to understand how what possibilities we can create from artificial intelligence, from this, how artists collaborate maybe with machine learning or with artificial intelligence, and the different kind of areas that they, and the doors that they open up in terms of discussion, in terms of knowledge, different forms of knowledge, and different forms of knowledge, not just from humans, but also non-human entities, but also thinking of the, if we are to think of AI as a kind of God-like figure, then again, how we can move away from this Western kind of idea of God, like that is punitive, to something that is talking about more respect and care, and and mutual respect, not just for humans, but also for the planet as a whole. And that was the end from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irini. That was super fascinating, and I actually feel a lot of resonance with the topics that you talked about. And for example, especially the kind of the binary logic of like the juxtaposition of the binary logic of the algorithmic processes, and also the non-binary sort of human machine or human non-human hybrids. So like, for example, the like human and machine are not the sort of the two polarized ends of the spectrum, but instead in a more kind of gradient transitional stage with a mixture of real human labor and also a kind of machine autonomy. And I'm particularly interested in just one quick response, because I'm also curator on the subject of AI and art, and I'm actually often challenged in terms of like the kind of embedded knowledge barrier or learning curves of an exhibition on AI and art. So like these kind of exhibitions are often quite intense in terms of knowledge, concept, and sometimes technical jargons. So I guess my question will be like, what is your curatorial method to kind of create a sort of an intimate feeling for the audiences for them to feel the topic and the sort of the ethical issues discussed are quite close to their real lives? What are your strategies?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and I think it will always be a challenge, an ongoing challenge in terms of how do you deal with these ideas. One thing that felt quite interesting, and it opened up like a new way of working for me, was this actually the context of the pandemic and the restrictions of the pandemic gave us like the chance to experiment and also to take work out to the streets, for example. And that was a really interesting way of engaging differently with these subjects in terms of like artificial intelligence moving from our personal devices and our personal spaces into something that is in the very public space and realm as well, in terms of how we are being viewed and surveilled all the time, and having these critical conversations with communities that often do not engage with exhibitions and museums as well. So this is something that was quite valuable in terms of helping to move away from the Western context, if you want, in terms of like how we talk about these subjects, and that was like a little bit of a kind of a threshold in terms of like just going to a place like Greece to do that, and also in an area that was very much mixed in terms of like immigration, but also in terms of languages spoken, etc., and people who are affected, because to be honest, like Greece is part of this big South as well, and debate as well, and there is a high percentage of like ghost workers now who have been using these platforms for income in terms of like, you know, as like Mechanical Turk, but also similar like Amazon's, etc. So it was really interesting to have these conversations out there and with like a different demographic.
Yeah, I'm also super interested in what you mentioned, this kind of a new technological landscape in a way nowadays, and this kind of the West and non-West conversations. I guess we should move on to the next speakers, who are Shinseungback and Kimyonghun. Shinseungback Kimyonghun is a Seoul-based artistic duo consisting of engineer Shinseungback and artist Kim Yonghun. Their collaborative practices explore technology and humanity in general, and their work has been exhibited internationally, including the Arts Electronic Center, ZKM, NTT-ACC in Japan, and MMCA. So the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Kim Yonghun. Today I'll be introducing some of our works and discuss what AI would mean to humanity. I work with Shinseungback, who studied computer science, and I studied visual art. Through this engineering and artist collaboration, we've been exploring technology and humanity, the nature, relationship, future, etc. Among many important technologies, we've been focusing on computer vision, which is a subfield of AI and deals with how to make machines see. This is the eye of AI. These are some examples of computer vision applications: character recognition, face detection, visual systems in self-driving cars. This picture compares human vision and computer vision. Computer vision has a camera, the visual sensor, like a human has eyes. And it has the computer, the processor, which is corresponding to the human brain. So you can see the world by itself and understand it without human intervention. Computer vision is not as good as human vision yet, but it has some advantages over human vision. Human can see just a small portion of light spectrum, the visible light, but machine can see much more light, like X-rays, infrared rays, and or radio waves, etc. So you can see things in the dark and even see things through walls. A typical human has only 2 eyes, but machine can have much more eyes, like visual sensors, like CCTV cameras, smartphone cameras, satellite cameras, etc. And it can use them all at once remotely through a network. The size of human brain is limited to the size of the skull, but the size of computer can be as big as a building, so it can process much more visual data faster. And the computer's processing power is getting better and better. When it's connected with the numerous visual sensors around the world, it could have global scale live vision. Let's say this circle is the universe. Human vision can see some part of it, and computer vision can see another part of it, and they overlap in some area. Our practice explores these areas which are in flux, and we think about what the dynamics of this relationship mean to humanity. Let me show you some of our works. Cloud Face is one of our earliest works. It is a collection of cloud images that are recognized as faces by AI. Let me show you the video. We took pictures of the clouds every 5 seconds and sent them to the computer to look for faces. So when it finds a face, it saves the image. face detection technology is developed to find human faces. So these are the result of error of the technology. But some of the images do look like faces to human eyes too. But we humans know these are not actual faces. We rather imagine the faces from the clouds. So the error of AI and the imagination of human meet. Captcha Tweet is an application that posts your tweets as captcha. If you don't know the term captcha, you must have experienced it. When you try to sign up for a website, this kind of distorted text appears, and they make you type in what the characters are. Computer vision is not as good to read these distorted text yet, but humans manage to read them. So if you can read the text, you are regarded as a human. If you cannot, you are a computer. So the fact that text in CAPTCHA is not legible to computers, we used it as a secret communication tool between humans, and we applied it to social network communication. Let me show you how it works. You can use it as well. It's in the internet. You log in with your Twitter account. First you go to CAPTCHA Twitter account and log in with your Twitter account and type in your message. Yes. And click CAPTCHA, then it turns your message as CAPTCHA. If you don't like the look, you can change it and press tweet. Then this tweet gets posted in your Twitter timeline. The piece, so if you use this application, only humans can read your tweets. So this piece could be discussed in terms of surveillance, but we actually thought more about the relationship between machines and humans when we created the piece. CAPTCHA is, in a way, is a symbol of humanity because this is something that only humans can do. But as you can see the pictures here, CAPTCHA has been changing its forms as computer got smarter and they started to read the existing CAPTCHA. If we distort the text more, humans cannot read it either, so it can't work. So we have now image-based CAPTCHA, and we also use mouse click to distinguish machines from humans. But we don't know how long these new tests would last as CAPTCHA. Then how could we prove ourselves as a human against the machines? Would we have something that can never be mimicked by machines? Non-facial portrait explores the question. We invited painters and asked them to make portrait of the subject based on the photograph. They had to follow one rule, which is the face of the completed portrait must not be detected by AI. When the painter is producing the portrait. The webcam watches the canvas, and it is equipped with 3 different face detection algorithms, which is drawn in red, green, and blue color, and informs the painter if it finds any faces from the picture. So the painter would refer to it and develop the painting. In the installation, the picture and the video of the painting process is exhibited together. The task is simple, but it's not quite easy to accomplish. If you make the portrait close to the human subject, AI will easily find the face. And if you distort the face too much, the portrait wouldn't be seen as the portrait. So if you have to find the very small visual space that only humans can see. If the painters successfully complete the task, these paintings would represent some kind of humanity, because humans only can see the portrait. If they fail, it will show the delicate situation we are facing. The original project was done in 2018 with 10 Korean artists, and we had a workshop in 2019 with Japanese artists at ICC Tokyo. Let me show you one of the participants' painting video. He tries to make a figurative portrait in the beginning. And see how much he had to change to avoid from face detection. Machines can hardly find faces from this portrait. Do we see the face of the subject from this portrait? Can we say these are the portraits of the subject? It's for you to decide if the painters successfully finished the task or not. In the near future, we needed to redraw the diagram like this. Computer vision became able to see most of what human can see and more. Non-facial portrait explores this area, this small area. It will be more and more difficult to find unique human abilities as technology develops further. This feels like a threat or crisis, but at the same time, it could be an opportunity for humans to find new human values to understand ourselves better. You can see the rest of our works in our website. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And I really enjoyed your exploration on facial recognition algorithms and that kind of ambiguous psychological space between human perception and also the mechanics of the algorithms. And I think maybe just one small question, like especially under the context of supervised learning, like we're at a stage of not just a computer telling whether this is a face or not. The algorithm is actually making more and more decisions on such as race, gender, age, and all that kind of details of a face. I just wonder if you guys have been exploring that part as well, and also this kind of embedded biases or more how do you say social understanding of an algorithm towards the facial patterns.
We are interested in those topics as well, but for us to explore the technology's nature, we have to have the technology mature enough to judge. So for now, face detection works relatively well. It's I think it's not perfect, but it's mature enough to investigate. But those technologies like facial recognition, such as race detection or gender, etc., it's not good enough yet for us to explore. But we are waiting for the technology to mature.
Okay, that actually brings me to another question I wanted to ask, but again, I will save that for the Q&A session. Okay, so allow me to introduce the third panelist today, Vvzela Kook. Vvzela Kook is a new media artist who mainly works in audiovisual mediums, including performance, theater, computer graphics, and drawing. Kook's video works combine technology with her artistic practice to reproduce and convert urban cityscapes into an integrated virtual experience, guiding the audiences on a cybernetic journey. The condensed textures in her works connect with multiple sensorial levels in our perception and reintroduce the unexplored potential of video as a medium. The narrative plays an important role in her work, and the transmedia storytelling is part of the artistic concept as well, especially the mixing of delicate drawing, 3D printing, and video game optics in her videos show the wide range of media and materials the artist uses to visually translate her research-based project. So welcome, Vvzela.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Iris. Let me share my screen first. Okay. I'm a media artist based in Hong Kong. So I make mostly research-based artwork. I work with video, like we talk about animation, drawings, installation, or other forms that I found suitable for the situation. I usually research into historical sites, historical incidents, and how this incidents affects and shape our modern society, and what can we learn from history. My works are not about using technology and machine learning, but rather talks about it as a theme. My work can show currently in this website-based exhibition is called Confidential Records series, I would say. It's actually, to simplify, is kind of like a human and artificial intelligence conflict happen in the near future. And then, but today I will be the presentation I'll be presenting is actually not that much related to artificial intelligence, but I want to share some keywords, some aspects that I'm recently interested in or have developed the work with, like panopticon, surveillance, immigration, colonial history, and future sci-fi, utopia, dystopia. The recent research I'm doing right now is to find hidden linkage of the topics of my interest. To begin with, is basically the we can just put it like to research into the byproduct and outcast of modernity. So in my sharing today, I won't focus on AI. I take it as one of the technologies, a means of governing in the hands of human beings, not only shaping today's world, but also shaped by the ruler. Of course, this does not equate to decline the uniqueness of the problem we're facing with AI. I mean, we know that all of us are walking through the countless uncanny valleys in our daily lives nowadays. So it all began with designing. So let's try to imagine this situation. One being the only gardener of a great garden. He designed where the trees need to be planted. Elm at one place, maple here, larch by the side. In front of the big lawn, placed some phoenix trees for its fire-liking flowers. A line of orchid added some shrubs here and there. This gardener, he determined what species to include, what tools to use, what were in the picture, what were irrelevant. And then one day he found some scale insects on the stem of orchid and some chickweed under the trees. His experience and education let him know that he needed to kill those scale insects, otherwise the orchid would die, and pull the chickweed out of them being too invasive. Perhaps from the gardener's view, it's nothing wrong to sterilize the pests and weeds. What went wrong was how this mode was projected in the modern human society. Sorry, we're having a typhoon here, so I'm just shutting the window. Sorry. The idea of this gardening state came with modernity. What makes one gardener? How does the gardener define what are good plants and what are pests? Is this practice of defining legitimized? In the book Brave New World, Huxley wrote, "Civilization is sterilization." In the plot, producing babies while giving birth was seen as a filthy and uncivilized practice. Sterilization sounds a bit of wordplay in this case. Not only means the surgery to make a person or animal unable to produce offspring, but also the process of making something free from bacteria or other living microorganisms. Civilized society wants all violence eliminated. Perhaps we wouldn't want to admit it, but we really still witness some places exterminate a certain race or group of people in order to be harmonious, peaceful, polite, and stable, docile in the hands of its ruler. Civilization did not eliminate violence out of our life. It centralized it and made the instrument of political rationality. Any form of disobey would mark as a violence. And here, under these circumstances, comes the technology. During the making of this World Confidential Record series, one book gave me a profound impact. It's called Modernity in the Holocaust by Zygmunt Bauman. He's a Jewish, and in this book, he gave a new perspective of studying the Nazi Holocaust. He, again, taking the Holocaust as tragedy that happened only in a certain time, in a certain country, on a certain group of people, because this will eliminate the possibility that the same situation happens to other people again in the future. In his research, he found a linkage between the modernity and Holocaust. So in the modern world, we have bureaucracy and technology. Because of bureaucracy, we have these hierarchies, and we have like meticulous division of jobs that makes our kind of employee only focusing on the things he's doing. He's only responsible to his superior. He doesn't need to know the ultimate purpose, the very last goal of the work he's doing. So for example, in the Holocaust, probably the person who kills all the people, what he needs to do is just by pushing this button and by dividing the big job into meticulous purposes, you kind of minimize the moral burden of this person. Another aspect is, of course, technology. Because of technology, it makes this kind of mass extermination of people of a race possible, and it makes kind of like poisonous gas, of course, possible, all because of technology. And then in this book, Bauman thinks that it was bureaucracy and technology essentially make the Holocaust a very, very modern incident, and the modernity can actually contribute as a fundamental reason for this Holocaust to happen. And if you think that the Holocaust is too far away and too extreme, we can take a look at our work now. This is a drawing I made for my recent projects. We never stop dreaming about a perfect society, the paradise. Our standard keeps refined. The pursuit of economic progress and order building brought us massive waste. Wasted objects and wasted humans, like immigrants, homeless people, useless people, people that are not needed, people with no stake in the society. Some places in the world became dump site of modernity, massive waste dump along the path of least economic resistance. For example, a Soviet Union secret city called Odzesk, where they produced plutonium during the Cold War, currently is still dealing with the nuclear waste from Western countries. Same situation happened for electronic waste. As for the wasted humans, we just selected escapists and had them on the other side of the wall, distant and far away from our daily life. Problem solved. We never stopped categorizing and classifying objects, people. Instead, we're doing it in a more detailed and meticulous way, actually by AI. We're tired of bureaucracy, but still it is the system we'll rely on. With the technology progressing, the situation will be accentuated over time. And just recapping, like Irini just mentioned, during Nazis governing, they used facial recognition as well. And then it is basically what we're using to unlock our phones every day. As the saying goes, the owl may never spread its wings only when falling of the dusk. Also, Einstein said that technology is like an axe in the hands of a pathological criminal. How do we prevent an extreme regime to modify the assembly lines of everyday ordinary products into dreadful killing machines? Our experience since the COVID-19 let us know that it doesn't take an AI regime to realize full surveillance on certain people. We have social credit colored code. We are recognized, categorized, classified, just as one of millions of plants in a gigantic garden. We have facial recognition system watching each pedestrian to obey traffic regulation. We have our friend circle contacts, wallets, payment system, banking system, social credit evaluation system, all in one application. Our whole life is in a cell phone, while on the other end of the balance only lies our trust to the supervision mechanism, which in some countries still not available. in the hands of rulers, artificial intelligence is being used to build a digital system of social control, patrolled to identify opponents in real time. We have entered an era of surveillance. Those who control the code control the world. One of the questions I've been asked most is, why do my works always fill up some of the most uplifting themes? Dystopia, Holocaust, man-made disaster, nuclear contamination, extermination. I always feel that all the sci-fi stories that the creators described are numerous possible futures waiting ahead of us. If you like it, try to make it happen. If you are afraid of it, then try very hard not to make it happen. And today, at the end of my presentation, I would like to read some words from Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He gave the Nobel Prize in 1982. It might be too emotional for this situation, but I really want to share with you, as his speech, especially this paragraph, has become kind of motivation purpose of my research and works. It goes like this. On a day like today, my master William Faulkner said, I decline to accept the end of man. I will feel unworthy of standing in this place that was his, if I were not fully aware that the cause of tragedy he refused to recognize 32 years ago is now, for the first time since the beginning of humanity, nothing more than a simple scientific possibility. Faced with awesome reality that must have seemed a mere utopia through all of human time, we, the inventors of tiles, who will believe anything, feel entitled to believe that it is not yet too late to engage in the creation of the opposite utopia, of a new and sweeping utopia of life, where no one will be able to decide for others how they die, where love will prove true and happiness be possible, and where the races condemned to 100 years of solitude will have a last and forever a second opportunity on Earth. That's the end of my sharing. Thanks.
Thanks, Vvzela, for the really
Emotional.
Yeah, a little bit emotional sharing session. I guess maybe instead of asking a question, if you wanted to take this chance to also briefly introduce to the audiences your work at the online exhibition, because we only kind of got a glimpse of it. Maybe you want to elaborate a bit more.
Yeah, so basically it's like simply combine two things, like at the very beginning. I started to get to know this place called Kowloon Walled City in Hong Kong, like the second year I came to Hong Kong. And then it's basically a demolished place. Now it's a park, but used to be a home for like 50,000 people, like before it was demolished in 1995, in late last century. And this complex was actually built in Song Dynasty and kind of like change it through the time and space, not space, change it through the time and politics situations. And basically it's a very complicated cultural icon. You can find it's kind of like image in different cartoons, comic books, and movies like Cyberpunk 2077 and Ghost in the Shell, of course. And then I did research into this no longer existed neighborhood, I would say, and then actually I was encountered with another theory called law of acceleration returns. It says that the technology, human technology, isn't like going linear. It's like exponentially. It's like this, where like right before the explosion. And they called Ray Kurzweil, the scientist. He said that he predicted that the time that artificial intelligence will be smart as human being is in 2045. So at the very beginning, I just combined these two things together to create a situation where the underground Kowloon city became the final frontier and shelter for future humans against the AI regime. And then later, this underground Kowloon city became more and more like a metaphor, because I found it's much more complex. It's kind of like a situation that a lot of people is facing now in the everywhere around the world. So in later phases, I basically introduce and talks about like different work situations in this story set up as a sci-fi story. Yeah, basically it's like this.
Okay, thank you. And for those who are interested in checking out Vvzela's work, the link is in the chat. And last but not least, let me introduce Clemens Apprich, our first panelist today. Clemens is the full-time professor in media theory and history at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, as well as a guest researcher at the Center for Digital Cultures at Leuphana University of Lüneburg. He is an affiliated member of the Research Center for Media Studies and Journalism at the University of Groningen, of the Digital Democracies Institute at the Simon Fraser University, and of the Global Emergent Media Lab at the Concordia University in Canada. His current research deals with filter algorithms and their application in data analysis, as well as machine learning methods. Apprich is the author of Technotopia, a media genealogy of late cultures, and together with Wendy Chun, Hito Steyl, and Florian Kramer, he co-authored Pattern Discrimination. He is also a founding co-editor of Spheres, the Journal of Digital Cultures. So Clemens, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks. I guess you can hear me, right? Thanks a lot for the introduction, Iris, and also thanks a lot for the invitation to Sabine and to Un, and also the Goethe-Institut, of course, and all the organizers, right? And at the same time, also big thanks to the translators, because 2 days ago, it was actually very useful for me. And talking about hidden labor in this kind of like animation of, all these systems, I think that translators are like part of this labor that we usually don't see. I will share the presentation with you, so it worked before. So you should see it now. If not, you can use the chat and let me know. So what I've been asked to talk a little bit about this problem of pattern discrimination, right? Because I've been working and then kind of like things that from there that helped me kind of like to extend a little bit on this issue. So I've been working on the notion of pattern discrimination for quite a while now, and the book has been mentioned. I co-published a book together with Wendy Chun, Hito Steyl, and Florian Kramer. And the book investigates how relatively old forms of segregation based on the social constructs, such as race, class, or gender, get actually reinstated in algorithmic cultures. So instead of providing this kind of like more objective basis for decision-making processes, filter algorithms, and you can see them really everywhere, right? We heard a little bit about this, but especially also in recommendation systems, for example. These kind of like filter algorithms deepen bias and further inscribe inequality into media technologies. Yet, and that's the interesting part in computer science, pattern discrimination is used as a technical term to describe the imposition of identity on input data, right? In order to filter, and that is to discriminate information from it. So, and as you all know, in a nutshell, this is what AI and machine learning is all about, right? It's that simple. You have a bunch of data, you need specific kind of like patterns, a model, whatever, and you extract this data in order to get information. And if the data, of course, is racist or sexist, then it should come with no surprise that your algorithm will be racist or sexist too. So far, so good. Actually, not good. And there is a lot of very important work out there on these kind of like ethical implications of algorithmic filtering. And I think Irini really kind of like did a great job showing us also the kind of like the artistic work on these kind of things. On a scholarly basis, there's Sophia Noble's book, Virginia Eubanks, Kathy O'Neill, and Rua Benjamin's. A lot of these kind of like works really kind of like showing also what kind of like problematic implications these technologies have. However, I think that the problem of pattern discrimination goes far deeper than usually acknowledged. The problem really is that you cannot not discriminate when making use of algorithmic filtering technologies. Every time you filter information from data, so that's the trick, right? You employ some form of discrimination. So I think this is a really troubling issue, right? That forces us, or at least me, to kind of like reformulate also this initial problem of pattern discrimination. And I think what would be helpful, and now kind of like working for an art university since a couple of weeks actually, I think there's also some kind of like to gain from this specific focus on aesthetics. So rather than just, which is an important work, but not simply only focus on ethics and the logos, right, when it comes to AI. So it would be also this kind of like focus on the pathological relationship we entertain with our machines. And this really goes back to the very classic definition from rhetorics that pathos is actually a rhetorical means, right? Next to ethos and logos. And I think logos we see a lot about, trying to find the technical definitions of these systems, the ethos, as I just said, the kind of like political implication that comes with it. But I think we should also, especially in these artistic practices, also focus and concentrate actually on the pathos. And here I like to joke a little bit about, I think we should be a little bit more pathetic, right? Not less. And according to us coming from media studies and kind of like a German tradition here, and I'm afraid that also the next kind of like slides will be a little bit very Eurocentric, right? But according to the German media theorist Friedrich Kittler, all aesthetics actually starts with pattern recognition, that is pattern discrimination. So by the same token, it might be very interesting to see how then aesthetics can help to reformulate this kind of a question of pattern discrimination. And I think a good starting point, especially like in view of the recent developments in AI and machine learning, as we have seen, right, the most recent manifestation of machine learning would be neural networks. So as a good starting point would be the well-known work by the Spanish neuroscientist and actually artist Monquet, which I didn't know. So he wanted to become a painter, but his dad actually didn't allow him to. The Spanish neuroscientist Santiago Ramón y Cajal. Cajal was actually a follower of the neuron theory, so-called neuron theory, formulated by the anatomist Wilhelm von Waldeyer-Hartz in 1891. That is a very German name, actually. It's as, I don't know, it's as German as you can get, I think, Waldeyer-Hartz. And this kind of like neuron theory stated that neurons are the basic individual unit of the nervous system. Until then, it was actually kind of like believed that the nervous system is something like it consists of nervous fibers as this kind of like dense continuous net, right? So here you have kind of like a battle between discrete digital units, so the neurons themselves, or the more kind of like continuous analog fiber network. However, this new approach of neuron theory got them popularized by another guy, German physician, Paul Emil Flechsig, who became one of the founding fathers, actually, of neuroanatomy and heavily influenced modern, that is, biological psychiatry. For example, among his students was Emil Kraepelin, according to whom, all mental disorders can then be kind of like traced back to biology. So everything is biological in nature. And I mention all this because there is a clear link between these kind of like connectionist ideas. So the idea that the mind can be traced back to this kind of like brain physiological wiring and today's algorithmic culture, right? As I said, in its most recent manifestation, machine learning appears in the form of artificial neural networks that are explicitly modeled on the basis of the mammal brain. Not only do some of the best known AI research units literally carry the brain in their name, like Google Brain, DeepMind, Project Brainwave, and so on, but it is precisely the connectionist paradigm that guides this research, that guides this specific AI research. And as some of you might know, right, this also goes back to, for example, the paper by McCulloch and Pitts on artificial neurons in the 40s, but especially also Frank Rosenblatt's idea of the perceptron, which was a very early kind of like simplified neural net. However, this link between connectionism and today's AI and machine learning research is, at least in my view, deeply problematic. because it reduces the issue of intelligence. And intelligence is also an interesting word, because from the Latin intellego, it also means kind of like choosing between. So it's also kind of like a similar word than discrimination. So this issue of intelligence, the reduction of the issue of intelligence to a biologistic understanding. Talking about artificial intelligence always implies some form of natural intelligence, right? And this is an idea that has repeatedly been disproved as being racist and many other things. Now, my criticism of connectionism, and really connectionism understood here as this kind of like underlying logic of today's AI research, based then on machine learning and neural networks, comes from a psychoanalytical perspective, not least because psychoanalysis can be seen, at least historically, as an antagonist of neuropsychology and these kind of like biological underpinnings. It was Sigmund Freud himself who already in 1895 formulated the idea of a psychic apparatus. And contrary to the kind of like dominant discourse of his time, Freud was actually less interested in the material structure of the brain, but rather in this kind of like psychodynamic foundation of the human mind, right? Which then later became this very famous topology of id, ego, and superego. Of course, he started in neuroanatomy, but then you can see how it kind of like moves away from this kind of like, from this field. And this is also the reason why psychoanalysis has positioned itself against all forms of brain physiological materialism, and similar attempts to depict the psyche by simply looking into the brain. Psychoanalysis does not constitute the psyche as something interior, so that would be like the colloquial understanding, right? It's something about the psyche as an interior thing, but actually psychoanalysis theorizes the psyche from a kind of like relational perspective, right? Which looks at the interplay between the inside and the outside. It sees also technical media not merely as some kind of like extension or prothesis or tools, but considers this kind of apparatus as an integral part of our psychic life, and hence also of human life, of course. And in that sense, I would say that, and I think that really links perfectly to some of the works also in the exhibition, that man and machine are part of the same symbolic realm, right? And not kind of like in different, kind of one is in the singularity and the other one is still kind of like on Earth. No, they operate in the same kind of like symbolic order. And at least for me, I think the acknowledgement of this often also pathological relationship between the human and the machine is necessary if we want to formulate the critique of today's AI paradigm. And this also concerns this kind of like whole fetish about the self-generating artificial intelligence, right? Which in order to be able to function has to omit, or better to oppress if you want, the still very human labor needed to animate machine intelligence. And Iris mentioned this in the introduction, and Irini just like, which I'm very glad, I mentioned also the work by Hiba Ali, where you can also see this kind of like, you know, the focus on the human labor that is still kind of like animating the machines. And the very famous example of Amazon Mechanical Turk would come up here, right? Which I love as an example, because if you read the subline, so it's Amazon Mechanical Turk, and the subline is actually artificial intelligence. So in some sense, Amazon itself gives you kind of like the key to their own bullshit, right? That it's not about artificial intelligence, but it's actually animated by all this labor going into the process. Or as you can see from the map here, which is a famous one done by Vladan Jolla in cooperation with Kate Crawford, right? This would be, for example, an attempt to map an interaction with Amazon Echo, and then to see how kind of like what it all entails actually just to have this one interaction with, you know, the Amazon system. Now, the problem with today's algorithmic culture is not so much that technology is changing society, right? That has always been the case. But on the contrary, that the much heralded change, so the kind of digital revolution, the AI revolution and so on, is merely kind of like a simulation of pre-existing social relations. Capitalism, of course, but also racism and sexism as this kind of like always self-fulfilling prophecies. Now, my premise is actually this, and I want to end here. If simulation eventually leads to this kind of like always the repetition of the same, then maybe animation can offer an alternative, politically, scientifically, but also artistically. The kind of like animation of intelligence entails what cultural anthropologist Dietmar Kamper called acts of pre-mutation. So in German, it would be Vorahmung, it's a pre-mutation, following the old Greek meaning of mimesis, actually. Whereas simulation, so the Nachahmung or the kind of like imitation, creates almost this artificial doublet of the word. Pre-imitation engages the word by opening it. And one could add actually with Walter Benjamin that this kind of like mimetic ability actually tends to increase rather to decrease with automation, so that our ambiguous relationship with machines yields actually a lot of this creative potential. And the presentation by Shinseungback was actually kind of like what I want to point here, right? I mean, on the one side, what the machine and man do together is this kind of like, you know, seeing faces in the clouds, right? A very old Greek word for that would be apophenia, which is just another word for pattern recognition, right? We always see this kind of like same patterns again and again. Or capture is a beautiful example as well, which we might discuss, because it's also like the completely automated public Turing test, right? And if you see that there's an irony in there, because Turing actually wanted to bring man and machine together, right, or closer together so that they can have a conversation, as he says. And capture is completely the opposite. It's trying to separate man and machine. And I think it's also kind of like this emphasis on this creative potential of human-machine relations that might help us to push past these kind of like usual accounts of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Technology appears here really as this kind of like practical knowledge that we produce by interacting with and learning from machines. Thus, the artificial intelligence rather refers to a craft, right? And techne would be the very old Greek word actually for art, right? So practical knowledge that is needed to animate any form of intelligence, human or non-human. And intelligence, also in this perspective, is not something that kind of like sits in our brain, right? Something pre-given that can be imitated in the form of artificial neural networks. Instead, intelligence is always external. It's a social ensemble of human and non-human elements, or something that Karl Marx simply called like the general intellect. So rather than fetishizing the technological as some kind of like intelligent superpower, and we heard this also in the introduction, we should pay attention to the very mundane, I think, relationship we maintain with our machines. This might also help to kind of like reformulate the problem of pattern discrimination. Not simply as a technological or ethical problem, though this is a very important work, I want to stress this, but not simply as those that can always kind of like be solved with better kind of like models or data, right? But really as a pathological one that we have to fully acknowledge first and then try to carefully like work through. And I think this is also the lesson we can learn from psychoanalysis, that it's not about solving something in the first place, right? But really trying to acknowledge and then work through. I think also like Vvzela, 2 days ago, you actually mentioned this, you know, in the question about the Kurzweil singularity, right? That we first have to kind of like do an evaluation of the situation, right? Instead of finding a solution. So I think this is like where we are actually in right now, that we need to find this kind of, we need to do this kind of evaluation first and also acknowledge these problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Clemens. It's really fascinating sharing. And I totally agree that some of the points that you brought up, for example, this kind of reductionism or oversimplification for the sake of efficiency or performance of the models that currently existing in our kind of the tech companies. And also like, I think it's real that culture as researchers sometimes can really explore, or in a speculative way, the kind of non-efficiency or non-performance driven part of the technology, and perhaps we'll see what the real untackled problems are. Maybe, as you said, not a technical one, but a pathological one. And just on a side note, I've actually been following a lot on kind of the new explorations on the AI direction. For example, the spiky neural networks, SNN, or more the unsupervised learning based on small data sets, and this kind of allowing the computer in a way more autonomy in discovering what's in their mind. So I guess that will possibly also bring up a closer connection between our understanding of the neuroscience and machine learning, and maybe enlarge a new space for potential discussion, as you said, the symbolic realm between human and a machine. I just want to share a little observation from my side for your talk. So I feel that there is this common ground or shared plane of interest constructed by people from both sides. So like humanity or media studies researchers who are interested in the discussion of technology, its potentials and limitations, especially from media studies or Hitler, as you mentioned, and also maybe from social sciences in particular, and also the tech researchers or technologists who do have like sincere cultural concerns about the pathways or trajectories of our current tech quote unquote evolution. For example, Kate Crawford, you mentioned in your talk. I'm just curious about whether you have exchanged with people from like these kinds of tech backgrounds who do share the similar concern with you, and do compare like the way you work methodology wise with them?
Yeah, sure. No, I did. So in Canada, but especially also like in Lüneburg. So that's the one thing that I work very closely with a professor in machine learning. And the one thing I can say, as you said, right? I mean, that's the interesting thing, that they're also very interested in this kind of like provocations, if you want, because most of them are like actually kind of like really bored by doing the same data sets again and again, right? I mean, he's working on some kind of like football data, for example, right? And there's an application, he's doing this for years, right? So he kind of like liked the provocations and to work around this kind of thing. We thought about the paranoid search engine, for example, as if this might make sense, these kind of things. On a more abstract level, what I see is the whole kind of like field of digital humanities, right? Where all this kind of like discipline that you mentioned are kind of like embarked somehow, right? So computer science, social sciences, humanities. But I think the problem really is here that it's a one-way, it's defined right now, it's a one-way thing, right? It's always about how can digital tools help us to improve kind of like research questions in the humanities, like, you know, you have a body of text and then how can you apply kind of a digital tool? But what about the other way around? How can the whole kind of like knowledge that humanities or critical humanities has on representation, identity, but also race, class, and so on, right, can be applied to understand how the digital actually works, right? So I want to see the kind of like way back to understand this better. And I think this should be also something that humanities, where the people from the humanities should be a little bit more bold, I would say, to also raise their voice and say, we also have something to say here, right? But otherwise, you know, otherwise we shouldn't be too timid in this kind of like debates. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's a really nice touch point. I guess also it's relevant to all our panelists today. So just allow me to invite everyone to turn on the camera, and we will enter our 30 minutes of panel discussion, Q&A session right now. And again, to the audiences, if you have any remarks or questions, just leave them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and we will read them out for you. Yeah, I think from the presentations today, I already see some connections, and also seeing the panelists begin to reacting to each other's talk, which is fascinating. And also we have great combinations of artists and also researchers and curators working on the same direction, which is AI and art and human machine in general. So I guess it's just a nice combination. And I will start my question with the artist, just out of curiosity. And yeah, because one interesting point aspect I noticed about artists working with AI is the relationship, literally like the collaborative relationship or the human tool relationship between the artist and the machine in general. And for example, Vvzela Kook, you mentioned that you did not work with any particular kind of AI model, and in Shinseungback's situation, you were directly working with computer vision, and you did mention that you're waiting for the tech to be quote unquote mature to a certain stage to be employed in your work. So I guess my curiosity is from an artistic point of view, what do you think is your relationship with the machine or the tool? And do you think it's necessary to actually work with AI model to talk about the topic? And also, do you think you are kind of following the text trajectory, or it doesn't matter? Like, what is the organic or the ideal relationship with the technology in your eyes from your practical point of view?
Thanks for your question. For me, I'm totally not against it, but I think probably is that I was basically learning like animation, sound making, and all those mediums. So like those are the medium I get very used to, and I found them very like hands-on when I actually do the works. And for the topics and the habits of developed works, I basically like look back into history and see how history affects the daily lives. And I think you mentioned about like waiting for the technology to be mature. I think I probably said that when I was working on 3D printer or something. Yeah, that was like probably around 10 years ago. I don't know where you dig it out, but yeah, I think I thought about that like before, but now I'm using a lot of like 3D printers because like I think the quality and the aesthetics is like really is probably the direction I would like to go. And in terms of machine learning based artworks, I actually have like upcoming commissions that need to involve machine learning into my work. So I'm still like kind of like learning and developing, like research into that direction. Yeah.
Thank you. Shinseungback and Kimyonghun, what do you think?
When I first used the technology, the computer vision, it was more than 10 years ago. I was interested in it more in terms of as a tool. I studied photography, and when I came across with the technology, I felt this will be the next visual technology, a very important one after photography, and which will see by itself without human intervention. It's the first visual technology ever that it sees by itself. But as I more work with it, I realized that we see through the technology, but it sees for us, and it sees us, and there is relationship between the technology and human. And then I was more interested in the technology as a subject of my practice. So I think it is it's not really it must not be that we have to use the technology to address its implications, but I think it's I don't know, effective to use the technology to show the nature of the technology. So to let you know the taste of the food, it's easier to make a food and let you taste it, rather than just talk about it.
Yeah, so like making it in a more tangible way, in a sense, or sensorial way. Yeah. And I guess my second question will go to Clemens and Irini, and related to something that I also noticed in both of your talk. Actually, Clemens' talk, you did also remind me of the article by Hito Stario about epiphania, so which is not just a visual mechanism, but also a way of the attempt to let the pattern to emerge across different kinds of data sets without actually checking how or if they respond to any empirical reality. And I think a lot of recent researches, for example, the Efflux article on how to make a forest and this kind of studies do kind of remind us that we don't necessarily live in the same data planet. So we are talking about technology landscapes that do have all kinds of cultural and ideological backgrounds. So I guess in your practices, what do you think are the most urgent cultural issue emerging from this new cartography of AI? As Irini mentioned, you're working with the south of Europe, and then this is a different cultural context. So what are the most urgent cultural issues in your eyes?
Sorry, Sarah. Yeah, Sarah, go for it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, it is about this because at least like I come from the south of Europe, and of course I have hardly ever lived there. I was educated in the UK, and like all of these conversations that we've been involved with come from a very Western like perspective as well. And as you say, and so I feel that also the cultural conversations in a way have been dominated by the same kind of, you know, let's say narratives that come from like the companies, like the Western companies and like the Silicon Valley kind of, you know, like mindset that comes to occupy like these ideas. So it's definitely, so I would like to maybe mention here the Ayedamola Okusein is like the artist kind of thinking about the you know, the injection of the alien kind of way of thinking, which is like in a way like everybody, all these the kind of, you know, culture like a perspective, but also people who are not represented in these you know, in these fields as well, or in these narratives. And this is pretty much what at least I've been interested in terms of like how artists kind of bring that perspective very often, especially like, you know, not like artists from like a non-Western kind of background. Yeah, so I don't know if that kind of answers that question, your question, but yeah.
Yeah, Clemens, do you want to say anything?
Maybe from the other angle, like also to the question before, I really think like there's for a long time, especially in Europe, right? And I just started a new job at an art university, but I know it's like in other places the same thing. I guess for a long time, there's really been something like a hostility or even ignorance towards technology, right? But if you think about techne, the idea, again, it's a Western idea, right? It's an old Greek idea, but techne in the Latin word is ars. So it's the same thing, right? So it makes totally sense now that a lot of artists actually take up, as Kim actually said, like it was photography, film. Of course, you take up technology because it's the logos, it's the knowledge about art, right? So that's what it is. So it's very kind of like a thing that everyone should take this up. And I find it fascinating that this happens globally, right? What I'm also interested in another way is kind of like these kind of like, as you said, I mean, you have seen that in talk, like debunking some of these kind of like colloquial understandings, right? About the techne, if you want, and the kind of like ideology behind it. But one of the interesting things I find really is, and you know way more about this, I guess, is also the kind of like translation processes that happened, right? The binary system came from China, right? It was kind of like by the Jesuits, it came actually to Europe. Leibniz took it up and actually then implemented this, right? In his kind of like philosophy. But it is the Ying, as far as I know, right? The book of life where it actually kind of like emerged and how this traveled. How does it then travel back? These kind of like same ideas, right? China being like one of the leading forces in AI right now, right? And these kind of things really fascinate me to see also this kind of like linearities, not linearities, actually, this kind of like dialectics between, you know, different kind of regions and how this emerges. Fascinating. I mean, there's so many things, right? How, for example, different kind of languages could actually produce different kind of computer languages, for example, right? I know that a Japanese company in the 80s tried to understand and research different languages in West Africa, right? Because they thought about the kind of like grammar behind it, that this might be a better way to actually do the syntax in a coding space, right? Never happened, but that's then again, that's the capitalist problem, right? That then in the end, it's like the companies taking over. And I think just like to go back to this, I think the stupidity really doesn't come from the technology, right? It comes from us humans. So we actually put in the systemic stupidity. We have all those tools, and what do we apply GPT-3 for? So the large language models, copy AI to do a better copy editing, to call our, I don't know, the hairdresser, these kind of things, right? We are not mature enough to use these tools, I would say.
It just, sorry, just if I may jump in, you just reminded me, Clemens, also of projects like the Indigemoji, you know, like projects where are taken over. I don't know if you have come across it. For example, it's Australian kind of indigenous groups taking over like these kind of languages that are used more generally, like online. And this was very much specific to Twitter and emojis, but so they decided to like bring together communities from like indigenous communities and create like emojis based on indigenous kind of languages. And it's amazing that you can see this kind of reverse colonialism in a way, you know, like taking back. So this, I think, is something that is really important in terms of how creativity or like artists or like, you know, humanities like bring into this kind of technological world, if you like.
Yeah, I totally agree that I think we don't really, we're not like faced with that kind of one or two selection, like either technology like AI is evil or it's gonna, you know, like save us from the apocalypse. It's not that simple, but we're actually confronted with this kind of complexities and also dynamic relationship between users and coders, and also the so-called tech giants, and also potential critics who will discuss the technology in multiple ways. So it's a complex issue. And I guess that actually leads to my next question, which is for everyone, I guess. And that, because that is a question that also comes to my mind quite frequently, because we all know that the quote unquote AI is a kind of in progress term that kind of generally wraps up everything that we think is, you know, like machine learning or anything that is sort of challenging our intellectual frontier of what a computer could do as close to a human mind as possible. So it's not a fixed term, and it actually has changed in the past 50 years. And also I often, because like when I talk to some computer scientists, they will also be joking about when something is achieved already by a computer, then it's not called AI anymore. So it's such a fluid and in progress term. And in the same time, it's also quite so like embedded and intertwined with our daily life that sometimes we don't really recognize AI as AI anymore. So it's like part of our daily life, as Vvzela Kook just mentioned, is in your cell phone. So I guess my question will be like, taking the fact that most of us may not be aware that there is this ubiquitous existence of technology that we don't recognize as AI anymore, already embedded in our life. How do we explore or identify the kind of political or ethical issues embedded so deep in our life? So what's your like viewpoint towards it? It's an open question. Like how we find that deepest hidden problems or issues.
If I may, like invisible technology, like invisible AI seems like a problem, but we actually use technology without knowing it. Most of people don't understand how internet works. I don't understand how the computer works. Actually, I just know how to use it. But the experts understand how the internet works, and the computer scientists understand how the computer works. So the people who are in the AI related world, they should work hard, and they will know if something goes wrong, and they would try to find a solution. So we can should have hope and work.
Do anyone else have any feedbacks on this?
Just to add, I mean, again, you've seen that I'm into psychoanalysis, right? Not as a form, I mean, not that I know anything about therapy, but from a kind of like theoretical perspective. But the interesting thing is that we also don't know how other humans work, right? That's the interesting part. That leads to all these conflicts and misunderstandings and these kind of things. So really like, because I have this Turing mind, right? That we always, when it comes to the machine, we're a little bit unfair to them, right? They have to do everything and then we tell them, well, you still don't know how to taste strawberries and these kind of things. But we also don't, I don't know how you taste them, right? You know what I mean? So it brings me more to this kind of idea that it's a social relation anyway. So that's what I wanted to stress. So it's not about how the human mind works. It's really about any intelligence is always a social relation, right? And that's why it's so complex. But then I don't see any kind of like problem why technology, a machine or computer shouldn't be part of this, because all intelligence has always been mediated by technology, right? Is it writing? Is it books? The same comes to creative AI, I would say. I think the question is not so much is the computer creative, but in to what extent has human creativity always been mediated by technology, right? And I guess you as artists noticed, like, again, way more, right? There was always like technology mediating the kind of things. Yeah.
Maybe I can mention, I wanted to mention here like the work of algorithmic justice litigant Zoe Bolamini, for example. I don't know if you have come across the Coded Bias film that the Shalini Kuntaya did recently, and it started, actually the film starts with the quite well known now story of like MIT researcher and computer scientist Zoe Bolamini realizing that her face as a Black American is not being recognized by facial by recognition systems, and the film goes on in so many stories from people from mainly in the US and the UK, who obviously they might not be using terms like that, artificial intelligence, or talk about these technological terms and issues, but actually they do face the the impact, they are impacted, their lives are impacted by these systems. So for example, like the teenager that is one of the examples that I found really stressful as well was a teenager who was arrested in London and misidentified by facial recognition by the police, and then or like the residents in the building in, I can't remember the area in the US, that are kind of profiled from their own building as well. So it's really interesting to kind of see like who is being impacted, but also how we use the language for these technologies as well. And also one thing that I've been thinking quite a lot recently is also these very language kind of issue as well, in terms of like, which is borrowed by things like nature or other kind of areas that are very kind of they're quite far away from what we are dealing with in a way. So yeah, if that makes sense. So I thought that might be something to add here.
Yeah, especially like the kind of the ambiguity, ambiguous space that really hides the the relationships that we really have to deal with. We have two questions from the chat, and the first one is from Yuqian Sun, which is a question for all the speakers. So when you hear people mentioning AI, what's your instinct or overall impression about it? Is it a tool for creation of problem solving, a personalized character like Sophia the robot, or something like recommending algorithm that changes our life without humans' awareness? I ask it because the term AI is so frequently used in so many situations, and I'm just curious about the perspective you care about mostly. So maybe Clément, you want to respond to that, or anyone? Just record the first impression of AI you had in the beginning.
AI, I think of it as I think as an entity that that has just appeared in and which will change over time. And I don't think of it as a tool. It will be used as a tool for many occasions, but I think of it as an entity in general, and which have intelligence and will have impact on human lives. And the nature of AI is not fixed. It's a baby that we have to teach and raise.
I guess the question is really about the term AI is so multifaceted, and it connects, I mean, it has the sort of the embodiment issue, and also the visual metaphor, and also it's like whether it's an algorithm or real robot. So it really asks, so it's about like, what is your major concern, or what you care most about AI at the right moment? Maybe that makes the question clearer.
I mean, maybe briefly, I don't want to spoil the party, but I don't think that AI exists, right? I don't think there's no artificial intelligence, because all intelligence is artificial. So the problem is, there are artificial hips because they're natural hips, but as soon as that's what I mentioned, that's the problem I see. As soon as you say there's something artificial intelligence, you imply there's something like a natural intelligence. And then you're on this problematic territory, like IQ tests, and it comes to racism, who's more intelligent, these kind of things. So when you turn it around, it becomes more interesting to see intelligence anyway is always this artificial thing, right? And then it's more interesting for me to see the second thing, so AI, and then it's more about machine learning. Can a machine learn or not? I think this is an interesting question, right? And in there are a lot of different methods, by the way. We just like talk all the time about neural networks, but this is just the most recent, hype, if you want. There's so many other forms to explore, right? So this would be, I think, the way I see it, because AI, yeah, it's a term for everything, because it is everything, right? It's intelligence, actually.
The next question in the chat, I guess, is relevant to all of our panelists today as well, which is about, it's from Jane Crawford, who says that we cannot leave the decision-making in AI to programmers and technologists. Do you see art as a chance to make the processes how AI works more transparent to everyone? Irini, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yeah, definitely, because I mean, yeah, everyone shared examples in terms of like how artists kind of respond to these challenges, but also hopefully, open up spaces for conversation, but also helping us see like maybe, or imagine and think of like maybe different potential narratives and futures around these ideas in terms of like how, because yeah, just to go back also to what we were saying before, I mean, for me also artificial intelligence is a very problematic term, and it's something that, it is all of these ideas. When we talk about technologies in general, we are talking about we can't talk about all these technologies and these worlds without talking about power as well. So it's very much about these relationships, and it's about just deconstructing like these terms and ideas, and just seeing like what lies behind. So, and I definitely think that art has a role to play there, but also in kind of helping us kind of think of different ways to respond, and maybe design, or like, yeah, or like, but as I said, in my presentation, it is, for me, there is also this question in terms of like, how do we even talk about like creating clean or like ethical or like, just, yeah, like just technologies if we are still going to use them in this way that we use them today.
Yeah, and one final question from the chat, and connecting it to my final question as well. So the question is how the field of art can be better developed through AI in the future. And my final question is pretty close to this. So how AI will, what do you think AI will lead us to the version of humanity in the future? And again, that's an open question, so for everyone.
Okay, before answering the question, I would like to add for the first question, if AI exists, Clemens said AI doesn't exist, but maybe we could compare it to maybe God. God has no fixed, like we have figures in the books, but we don't have it in front of us. But we, many people believe God, and we can't say it's here, but it is. I don't believe it, but it's there, and they kind of, in that sense, we can say God exists because it exists in people's mind, but AI exists more than that because we actually have applications, and there are AI scientists and who actually people who actually work with and people who actually use it. Maybe there's no like we can't define it maybe because this is in flux, but I do think AI exists, and maybe I shouldn't say it as a baby. I should say it as a baby God. And to answer the last question, I think AI will work in the field of art. It will. It's not. I'm not interested in that making better art with AI. I'm interested in that we will be forced in a way to make new art because of AI.
Vvzela, do you want to add to that?
We have to. We will be forced to make a new art because of AI. Like we had to. We know that how Impressionism emerged after photography. In that sense, that's what I'm.
Vvzela, do you want to add to that as well?
Not really.
Okay. What about Clemens, Irini?
But I think it because it fits. I guess my problem is a little bit that the art, every time things turn upside down, we ask the art to save the world, right? I mean, so computer science had a long time, scholars, whatever, and now it's the art, right? And you have to save humanity now. I feel really sorry for you sometimes, right? But what I saw in Vvzela's work, and I have to get more into this, is really, really mean is kind of like also, it's an evaluation of the situation first, right? Before trying to save something. I guess this is really important as a kind of like first step to learn something, right? If you don't do that, and from history, as he said, right? It's this kind of like, looking backwards and moving forwards, right? Instead of like always running forwards and say like, let's apply to the new things. We need digitization. Yeah, let's go, right? No, it's this kind of like very careful steps, right? I think this is what I saw from Vvzela's work, actually.
Irini, what about you?
Yeah, just to it is. I've always said that it is actually. I love how you put it, Clemens, in terms of like feeling sorry for the artist. So, but it is about asking questions. It's this is the first thing. It's like we're not used to to do nothing or step back or ask or interrogate things, and that's for me that's the starting point, as well as Clemens said. So yeah, so it's ask more questions first.
Yeah, asking more questions for ourselves and maybe think about the future of humanity together with the things that we create. I guess that's actually a very good end point for our conversation today. And I just wanted to thank you everyone again for the fascinating presentation and the really, really good conversation. And also, yeah, please do check out the exhibition online website. And also, we also, in the same time tomorrow, we also have the final panel discussion on Metaverse, a collective virtual space. So you're welcome to join tomorrow as well. So I guess it's time to hand back to the host, and thank you again.
Yeah, thank you so much for this really tremendously inspiring evening. I'd like to warmly thank our guests for their thought-provoking contributions, the audience for joining us and for sharing their remarks and questions, and especially our wonderful moderator, Iris, thank you, and Sabine and Dun, of course. Please join us again tomorrow, the closing day of our conference, when we talk about the new metaverse with our guests, digital sculptor Aurea Harvey, artists Lupente and Rini Shi, both are also on our exhibition, and curator Annika Meyer. Our moderator will be Michael Connor, artistic director of Rhizome in New York. So good night and see you again tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.